Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cura and our monthly Cura chat. We're super excited this month, particularly, to have the famous, sorry, in the room, to have a four-time 100 top Latino in tech leader, Carlos Quezada, with us today. I had the pleasure of meeting him at the HPE headquarters, the Hewlett Packard Enterprise headquarters, a couple months ago. If you haven't met him already, if you haven't read his book already, he is a wealth of knowledge, information, and network for our community with the real life story, right? That resonates with a lot of us and our struggles and our ambition. So super excited for him to be here today. For those of you that are new to Cura, Cura is a early career accelerator. We're here to help specifically first-gen students and early career talent advance in their careers, get ready for the workplace faster so they can make a bigger impact. And we're all first gen. Sylvia and I are co-founders of Cura, first gen Latinas, entrepreneurs, and doing what we can to make our community a better place and encouraging you all to do the same, right? And these conversations are very authentic, very direct. We want to break down the things. This happens only if we get the real questions that you want. So please make sure to ask the real questions so we know the topics that you're interested in. Without further ado, Carlos, if you wouldn't mind giving us your official introduction, official title, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks everybody for joining and thanks for having me here. I see a couple of friendly names here, so great to see everybody. Uh, I official title. First of all, Mexicano, born and raised in Mexico. Live in San Jose. Graduated from Silver Creek High School here in East San Jose. I am the Vice President of Customer Experience and Digital Strategy for HPE. I've been with the company for about 8 years. Uh, in HPE, I also sit on the DEI executive board representing the Latino employees for HPE, and I'm also the executive sponsor for Juntos, the Latino Employee Resource Group. I'm also the founder of Unidos ERG Collaborative, which is an organization to go and unite the different Latino leaders across multiple tech companies in the US with our goal to go in and provide access and network to all of our members. And then most recently, also author of the Survival Guide, The Immigrant Survival Guide to Silicon Valley, which is a book that I released last year with the intent to really help, early career folks in how to be able to drive career success. You're on mute, Jen.
Thanks, Carlos. Pretty busy profile that you have there. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to this. Carlos, I was really fascinated by your story. Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got here, but where did you start? Where did you come from?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to tell people, my journey is not unique. I feel like a lot of us have very similar journeys, but I think it's important to tell our stories because I don't think that sometimes people realize, right? I think it's human nature for folks to form an opinion, right? I feel like, I go into the carniceria today, and which, by the way, I used to work at the carniceria myself growing up. I feel like I go to the carniceria and they default start speaking to me in English, like looking at me like, this guy, there's no way he speaks Spanish, right? Or they just assume that because of the job that I have, that I must have gone to some four-year university and have rich parents or something, right? And I think it's important for us to tell that story because you never know who you're going to inspire. So, for me, I feel that I'm very, very blessed to be in the opportunity that I have today. So I was born and raised in a very small town in Mexico called Degollado, Jalisco. It's about an hour and a half from Guadalajara. And growing up there, I worked in the hog farms. I didn't have any idea that I was going to move to the U.S. My father was a migrant farm worker, worked here in Salinas, Modesto, that whole area. And as a child, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Jose Hernandez and you guys seen his movie. If you haven't, plug for my boy Jose, um, who happened to write the forward to my book. So another shameless plug. And so if you saw his movie, very similar to him, I would come and go back and forth between the Mexico and the US, right? So I later learned that it was because of the immigration process. I'd get a visa, so we'd come here for a little bit and then I'd have to go back home. So I would say my entire childhood was constant back and forth between Degollado and Milpitas or San Jose. Like we were always in the Bay. I still remember when some of these were still orchards, right? That's how old I am, right? But finally, I ended up getting my residency when I was about 14, and so that's when we permanently stayed. And so from that point forward, I've been an East San Jose resident. I started high school at Silver Creek High School. And the reality is I almost didn't graduate, right? And I talk a lot about this in my book, and I think it's important to recognize some of the stuff that did make it to the book is I maybe was a little bit derailed during high school, hanging around with some of the wrong people. Coming from Mexico, going to a school like the one that I went to, you quickly have to kind of find your group and kind of, kind of build your little clique. And unfortunately, throughout the 4 years that I was there, that clique evolved into maybe some gang activity, right? And so it was something that it was just familiar to me. I was hanging around with all the other Spanish speaking people, and those Spanish speaking people were getting bullied by the non-Spanish speaking people, and it just eventually turned into something that it shouldn't have. But that also made it so that school became very difficult. It got to my senior year, and I had gone to night school. I'd gone to Evergreen College to try to make up credits, and I got it all the way to the end, and unfortunately didn't pass my last semester of government, and so they wouldn't let me walk the stage. And so even though I had more credits that I needed to graduate, I didn't pass that one required class, and so I didn't get to walk the stage. That was, I would say, that butterfly effect moment in my life because up until this point, I recognize that as an immigrant, I was the product of my parents' dreams. To them, their measure of success was to watch their kids graduate and walk the stage, right? We weren't surrounded, so I'm the second of four. My older sister and I were kind of like the pioneers in the family. We were the first to do a lot of things, including learn English and now graduate high school. And when I had to look at my father and tell him that I wasn't going to graduate, the look of disappointment in his face hurt. And that was that moment where I realized that I was very ungrateful for everything that they had done and the sacrifice that they had put in to get us to where we were. And the way I was raised is, I'm a man of my word. And so I felt like I had failed my father. And so I told him, I said, look, I apologize that this happened, but I want to make it up to you. I was like, I'm going to get you your graduation. Up until that point, I had been working at a Mexican grocery store. I was working construction on the weekends, very typical, right? It's just kind of the way that I was raised. And it was perfectly fine for my family that I would graduate high school and then go into construction full time. And my mom used to even tell me, "Que bueno, mijo, because now when you graduate, you're gonna have experience, so you can go and get a better paying job, or maybe you speak English, or maybe they'll make you foreman or something." Like that was kind of the ambition and the line of sight for my parents. But I now owed my parents this ceremony, right? This walking on stage and getting handed stuff. And so it forced me to really think about, well, how do I do that? So I ended up going to a trade school. I found a trade school um, that had a ceremony. And so I was like, I got to go sign up for this now. So at the time, that school is no longer around, but I went to a trade school called Masters Institute of Technology. So I joke and I tell everybody I went to MIT. And it was like one of those like 13-month programs, and it just so happened that I learned about computers, and I realized once I started how much I really enjoyed it. And in my mind, I was going to graduate from the school and go work at Geek Squad. Like that to me was like, this is going to be so cool. Like I'm going to get paid to fix computers. Um, so that's a little bit about my background and how I started. At the end of the day, God had a whole different plan for me. I ended up graduating from MIT and got my dad his wish of watching me walk. And I had fallen in love so much with it that I actually signed up again. So they did have these concepts of like degrees and certificate programs. So I went and I signed up and got like the second one, which is kind of the equivalent of the bachelor's in the trade school world, right? Um, and before I graduated that second term, I actually landed a job at a startup here in San Jose. Um, and so I'll pause there because I know that I can talk for the next 3 hours. But that's a little bit about my background. I would summarize it saying like not a very conventional background, had every reason why not to be where I'm at today. I am a big believer and I have a big person of faith, so I realized that had a lot to do with where I'm at now. But I also feel like there's a lot to unpack there. As I reflect back on how I got here, that was kind of one of the key driving decisions to go write this book is to really share a lot of the things that I've run into that I know aren't unique to myself, and then share with you all like how some of those things are overcome. And I wanted to not make this book about me, right? So I also went and I brought a lot of other Latinos that, in my opinion, are very powerful in their own careers to have them contribute and share their perspective on some of these different chapters and topics. So pause there. That was a long answer, Jim.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Sylvia?
Yes, that's amazing. I love it. One thing that stands out from what you shared was breaking into tech, right? So you went to MIT, you found you loved computers, and then you thought, I want more, right? I want to continue that journey. Can you share a little bit about how you decided and what else did you explore? How did you know to continue on that path, or why not something else?
So, in full transparency, right, when I went to sign up at MIT, they had two different curriculums. One was a digital arts curriculum, and the other one was an IT curriculum. And I wanted to be an artist. Some of the extracurricular activities that I did in high school may have included me doing graffiti, right? And so I was always very artistically inclined. I like to paint, I like to draw. And I was like, why not get paid to do it, right? And I was actually 17 years old when I graduated high school because I'm an October baby. And so when I went to sign up at the school, they had me do a placement exam just to figure out kind of, whether I was ready or not. And apparently, to my surprise, my math scores happened to be very stellar, which I was shocked by. And and they said, look, we actually think you should apply for the IT track, and I was like, no, I want to be an artist. And then they showed me how much money an artist makes coming out of the school and the 2 years of unpaid internship and portfolio building that you had to go and do before you can actually get paid. And then they showed me, this is back in 1999, right? They showed me how much somebody in IT would make coming out of the school. And so I decided to go and become an IT guy, right? Um, but the reality is that I didn't necessarily make the decision. The decision was made for me. So what I was working at a machine shop at the time. So I used to go to school Monday to Thursday, and then I would work 14 hours a day, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for like 2.5 years straight. No social life. It was just like work, school, work, school, work, school. And I had graduated, or I was graduating from this school, but I really liked my machine shop job. And I also talk about this whole thing about expanding your horizons. When I was working at the machine shop, my goal was to be able to run the laser cutter. Like that was like the big machine in the machine shop that not just anybody could use. And so at that point, that was like the top of the pyramid for me because that's the environment that I was in and that's what I aspired to. I never thought beyond that because one of the things I always say is you can't dream of something you don't know exists. And so if you don't expand your horizons, then that's as far as you're going to get. That laser cutter was going to be my career. And I got frustrated because I used to work the weekend shift and I was one of the younger guys there, but I had learned very, very quickly to the point where they made me the weekend supervisor. But because I was the youngest person and because I had learned everything here, I was also one of the lowest paid employees. And from a production perspective, I was outperforming my colleagues in the day shift and the evening shift, but making half of what they were making. And so I went and I essentially threatened to quit if I didn't get a pay raise. At the time, they agreed that they were going to give me a pay raise, and then when I came back a couple weeks later, my paycheck hadn't changed, and they started giving me all kinds of excuses. And so out of frustration, I quit right in front of my boss. I don't have another job. I just quit. I was like, you know what? Like, I'm done. Like, I can't. I'll go find another machine shop job who's willing to pay me more. And that's what I thought was going to happen. But then it kind of hit me, and I was like, well, I'm working on this computer stuff. Why don't I go see if I can pursue something? And so I didn't know how to break into tech, so I went and are you guys familiar with Manpower, the staffing agency? So I started going to all these different staffing agencies. I'd never had to do that before, and I didn't realize that there were staffing agencies for different verticals. So I mean, I applied for like medical staffing, just everything. And one of the staffing agencies called me back and said, "Hey, we have this 6 month gig. We think you'd be perfect for. It's entry level." And they reminded me like 4 times, it's only 6 months. I was like, "Yeah, it's fine. I'll work there until I find that next machine shop job." And again, this is where faith comes in. I started working at this startup. It was probably about 60 people right here in San Jose off of Winchester and Payne, if you guys know, not too far from Santana Row. And my job was to come in and sit in front of these monitors and that was it. Right? This is before like automation and AI happened. And every 20 minutes, I had to grab this clipboard and go into the server room and make sure all the lights were green. And they didn't care what you did in between those 20 minutes. Literally you had an egg timer. So in between 20 minutes, you could do whatever you want. Some of the other people that sat with me would like play on their PlayStations or whatever. I'd be doing homework and I'd walk in every 20 minutes. But then I was very, very curious. So that's, I would say, the other thing, right? Is I think the curiosity piece was a big thing because I wasn't okay with just sitting there. I needed to know what all this stuff was. I saw all this stuff flying through the screens, all these different colors. And because I was studying computers, I was like, I want to understand what this is. And so because I asked a lot of questions, they would just hand me stuff to read. And like 4 months into this, I only had 2 months left. I had made friends at the company. And I found out one day that the CEO and the VP of engineering, who's a white guy and a Korean guy, they were standing behind me and they were talking about how they were going to Mexico City. And I chuckled. I'm a very playful guy, for those of you guys that know me. And I chuckled and I said, "Hey, so how's your guys' Spanish?" Right? Because neither of them spoke a lick of Spanish. And I actually call this my quinceañera story. I actually give a talk on this, the quinceañera story, because it just so happened, because this is the way God works in my life, that I was going to be in Mexico during the exact same time frame they were going to be having this meeting because I was going to be down there for my sister's quinceañera, which is the only reason I spoke up and said, "Hey, well, if you need somebody to translate, I'm going to be down there." Had my sister's quinceañera not been happening, I probably wouldn't have said anything. Well, uh, I ended up going down there. I ended up joining the meeting. And leading up to this meeting, I had been in San Diego for a couple of weeks doing some testing for for this company in San Diego. And when I went into the meeting, I was supposed to translate. But have you guys ever had that situation where like you know the answer, so you're like, ooh, 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 right? Like, well, that happened to me during the entire meeting. I ended up, forgetting that I needed to translate and was just kind of taking over the meeting. Have you guys ever heard of a company called Telcel in Mexico? Telcel is like the largest cell phone company in Mexico. It's like the Verizon of Mexico. And so imagine this 17, 18-year-old kid sitting in this meeting, taking over the meeting. And apparently, the company that I worked for invented what we now know as text messaging. And the conversations that we were having is they're trying to bring what we called back then wireless data over cellular, and they were offering it to Telcel. And Telcel was nervous because they're like, well, what's this going to do to our network? Like, you're going to bring all these different data devices on this network. It's going to bring my network down. Well, that thing that I was doing in San Diego a couple of weeks before is we actually lit up 1,500 mobile devices in San Diego for GTE TSI, if you guys remember Cellular One. And I had all the numbers. I knew exactly like what it looked like at scale, so I was able to feed these numbers. And so at 18 years old, I actually closed a nationwide contract with Telcel for this company. And because I was the only person in the company that spoke Spanish, rather than my job ending in 2 months, they actually hired me full time and then put me in charge of the deployment for the next 2 years for Telcel. So for the next 2 years, I was going to Mexico City every month for a week to help them go in and light up what we now know as text messaging in Mexico. So
Wow.
that's kind of how I ended up in tech.
Carlos, this is such a wild, wild story. And I love it, right? Because a lot of us that are on the call today are in that point, early career. Maybe they're not in their dream job. Maybe they don't know yet, how to dream big, what the possibilities are. But you give such a great example of being curious in the exact place where you are, right? Being open to possibility, not overthinking some things, right? Like just doing a little bit about it and how much that has opened up your life. And I'm curious, you're in such a prominent big role now. Did your career progress like that? Have you always just let life unfold? Or was there
Oh
ever a
yeah.
point where you're like,
I
that's what
never I never planned any of this.
Well, I think it's great because we don't talk about it that much, right? We always talk about like dream big, have your future self in 30 years from now and go that direction. But like what if you don't know? And this is such a refreshing alternative to like, don't worry about it, but
Well,
do the best
nobody knows.
you can.
Did, did,
Yeah.
did you know you'd be doing this? I
Heck
mean,
no.
right? So one of the things I always tell people, right? And again, I promise I'm not trying to plug the book, but there's examples of this, right? Um, you have to be very careful of getting too complacent, right? Don't get comfortable. And so what I do a lot of coaching and mentoring, and one of the things I love about my job is growing my team members, right? I have a global team in Mexico and in Romania and stuff, and different people at different levels in their career. But one of the things I always tell them is, if you're in the same job 2 years from now, either I failed as a leader or you're doing something wrong, right? Because we should always be looking, okay, now that I'm here, what's next, right? It's not like, now that I'm here, let me get comfortable and I'll do this for a while until I figure it out. Like, well, while you're here, you're going to do your day job, but then find out what are the things where can you go from here? And so one of the things that I always talk about is there's this concept of finding your rabbit. And I use the rabbit reference in two ways, right? One is, for folks that are runners, they have this concept of a rabbit, which is when you compete in racing, you always are going to have that person that's 1 or 2 seconds faster than you. And so the question is what are they doing that you're not, to build that speed? Figure out how they're training, how they're pacing themselves, how they're breathing. And once you understand what they're doing different, there's a chance you're going to start closing that gap and catch up to them or even pass them up, right? There's also a cartoon reference that I use for Bugs Bunny. If you guys have ever seen the Bugs Bunny cartoon, where there's a dog track, and in order to motivate the dogs to run the track, they release a mechanical rabbit. And so the cartoon, Bugs Bunny's chasing the female rabbit, right? But the idea is that all these dogs are motivated by this rabbit. And so one of the things I always tell my mentees is, who's your rabbit, right? So think about who's got the job that you want, right? And I would say, obviously, like, depending if you're early career, sure, the CEO may be that person or whatever, but let's take it back to maybe, you're 1 or 2 steps from now, right? Who's got that role? And so once you guys join that company, your first company, you may not be in the role that you want, but the whole idea is now you have the inside perspective and you can realize, I really think I'm more of a salesperson, or I really like more of the IT stuff, or maybe I like being more of a, I don't know, finance person, right? Because now you're on the inside, you have a better appreciation. Then you go and you find out, well, what role within those groups would I like to try one day? And so then you go on LinkedIn, look up that person, figure out what they did, what's their experience, where have they been, right? Jose Hernandez talks about like the whole kind of map to success and the 5 different ingredients, right? This is something that's in his book as well. And one of the things I always tell people is take it a step further and introduce yourself to that rabbit. Because I could tell you on a personal perspective, when I'm approached, I'm more than willing to do what I can to help you close that gap. Like if it took me 10 years to get here, if I can help you make it 5, let's do it, right? And you never know, that rabbit may actually slingshot you forward and help you get there quicker, right? And so that's what I would say. I would say that my career has been a series of fortunate coincidences or blessings, however you want to call it. But I would say one of the things that's helped me is to be curious, to always be learning, and to build an amazing network, right? I think, and then the last piece, I think the magic secret sauce is the law of attraction, which is you want to go in and you want to share with people, like, what is it you're trying to do? Where are you trying to go? Like, what is it you want? Because in the right circles, more often than not, people who can help you get there will speak up.
Oof,
Absolutely. I love what you said about that, because there's two things that are coming up right now for me. Is one is inserting yourself in situations and places where you can be open to the magic, right? What might happen for me here, but that requires action and just showing up, right? And what can you do? Asking for the thing, introducing yourself to that person you may not know, all those things. It's how do you, so what's a good way? You mentioned networking and mentorship. I know is a big part of your success. What's some advice you can give someone who really doesn't know what it means to expand your horizons, or where's the rabbits? Where do I begin? I'm just getting started.
Well, to pull on the expand your horizons, right? We're all creatures of habit, and I feel like we also live in a bubble. If you think about, at least I can only speak for myself, the way that I was raised, everything I ever needed was within a 5 mile radius of my house. School, work, church, La Pulga, whatever, right? And that's all I knew. And so growing up, I almost had like this resentment for like, the rich neighborhoods, or we're not allowed over there or whatever, right? I remember growing up East San Jose, like Valley Fair was a place that we never went to because that's for people with money, right? Like it's the way at least things have changed now, but when I was growing up, that's kind of the way it was. And it's like, well, shoot, well, why not me? And so just little things by just changing the coffee shop that you go to every day, right? Going to a neighborhood that you've never been to before, right? Or taking a different way to work and stopping by to buy a bagel at that one spot that everybody's talking about that you've never been. You never know who you're going to run into, right? And what you see and what you learn on the way there, or even the motivation that you get. If you take the same way to work every single day, all you see is Corollas and Nissans, and then you all of a sudden are driving a neighborhood and there's all these Teslas around, and you're like, damn, I want a Tesla. Like, what do I got to do? And then you get that kind of burn and that fire and that motivation, right? It's just more of get comfortable being uncomfortable, I would say, right? And put yourself in situations that are going to help you just grow. And it's either growing your network, growing your desire, or growing that motivation that you need to maybe think differently, right? And I'll be honest, I don't know that I've ever been in a situation where I actually felt that people were legitimately trying to not help.
Mhm.
I feel like once you're out there, I think the good news is humankind is still somewhat kind. Obviously, with all the stuff happening now, you get to see some of the ugly, but I still feel that that's still the minority, right? I still think that there's a lot of goodness and people legitimately want to help.
Mhm.
I love that. Such a great reminder.
That's so helpful, Carlos. I'm going to pause and just open it up to our community right now. Um, Questions that you want to ask Carlos.
I have a quick question. I find myself that as I climb a leadership ladder, it feels more isolating, specifically as someone who, went to school, did the educational route, whereas majority of my family did not. They did that, let's go work in the field, let's go work in construction. And I want to know from your perspective, how do you cope with that? How do you uh, praise yourself, but also know that it's not necessarily the route that you chose, but more along the lines of like las ganas that that drove you, right? How do you cope with that?
Yeah, so I love this question. So I have all these favorite quotes that I use. One of the quotes that I say a lot is it's only lonely at the top if you don't bring anybody with you, right? And so just know that as you start reaching that level of success, we all have a responsibility. And I always say, don't think me, bring three, right? Like when I mentor people and they're like, hey, Carlos, I got that job. Thank you. I'm like, don't thank me. Go find your three. Now you got to bring three, right? So I would say there's that, right? Don't assume you're alone. All these RG networks are an example of you are not the only Latino in tech. But guess what? There's not a lot of us, and when you connect with us, we all share a lot of the same stuff, so we can be a good support system for each other, which was the whole concept of the Unidos RG that collaborative that we set up is to have that level of support amongst each other. But one thing I will tell you is you will shed community on the way up. Absolutely. Right. And this is a dynamic that happens, and we all know that sometimes family is our own worst critic. But you have to make the decision about, what's more important to you, right? For me, it's about breaking those generational cycles and showing my son what normal looks like and what new normal looks like, right? And yeah, full transparency, there's people in my family that don't invite me to the carne asadas anymore. Not because there's animosity between us, but I feel that you become a mirror of what they didn't become. And that is something that they themselves aren't comfortable with. And so when you show up, you're a reminder of that to your with just your existence, you're reminding them that maybe they didn't put the work in, or maybe they've been complacent for a long time and they don't like how that makes them feel, so they'd rather not be around you. So it's nothing you've done, it's the fact that you're a mirror and they don't like what they see.
That is so good, Carlos. Thank you. What a great reminder because it's almost the flip side of the coin. We often hear the joke, "Oh, you think you're all bad now,"
Well, that
right?
happens all the time, yeah.
Right? But
Can you imagine how they felt when I'm like, oh, I wrote a book? Oh, they wrote a book and she going, right? It's it's
right.
it's unfortunate, right? Like it's
It's
it's so sad because I tell us all the time, like I legitimately like helping our people and I haven't been able to help my own family.
Mhm.
And I'm
Mhm.
talking about like my cousins and my cousins' cousins and like my circle, right? Like it's almost like they don't want to hear it. But folks like you, like I'll go have coffee with folks all the time and we'll sit down and put a plan together and we'll do all this stuff. I'll do that all day. And I would love nothing more to do that within my circle, but they don't want to play. And
Carlos,
so
it's so
Sandy,
powerful.
that's just the reality, right? Like
It's
you
so
you have to
powerful.
be the change.
And we don't talk about it enough, right? Because we value as a community, as a culture, our collective spirit, and it's challenging. Sandy, I hear you. You know, it's challenging. And when I started working and I started making a little bit of money, I mean, it's awkward when everyone looks at you to pick up the bill. Then everyone's happy. But then a couple of years later, you're still picking up the bill and they're talking smack about you, right? Like doesn't feel good. And I'm really glad we're having this conversation because the surface conversation is like, yeah, your family's always supportive. But sometimes we have to find our own support system, our own places where we can be real, where you can be authentic, and where we can love with a little bit of distance and compassion for our family too. That's really great. Thanks for the question, Sandy. Other questions?
I
Sis?
have one. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, that's okay.
You can go first. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No,
Sis.
sorry.
I just have a question because I am also in that spot right now where I don't know where I'm going. And I've shared that before. I have a very similar story of immigrant background. I think we all do. But right now what I'm kind of facing is what is the key ratio between networking, knowing where to go, and hard skills? Because I know I have them and I've been advocating for myself and I have pushed. And I feel like I'm losing my hard skills because I have no place to really practice them as much. So then I am effectively being pushed out of certain spaces or not being welcome in certain spaces. Um, just because, yes, I'm networking, but then your hard skills are also playing a matter to it. So like where can we find those hard skills and be included in these conversations that are also social and it's very hierarchical, you never leave the school system, sort of mindset is what I'm seeing, if that makes sense.
Cynthia, can you give me an example of the hard skills that you're referring to?
Yeah, um I graduated with a bachelor's of science in economics and policy and math. So I'm very analytical. I love learning about that stuff, really looking at how data can make an impact on policy and decision making. That's something I really like. However, that's not something I currently do because the job market was so hard to break into when it came to data analysis and data science.
Mhm.
So now I'm partially doing it and I'm very grateful for my job. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but that's not something that I'm constantly doing, which is something I would like to be doing. Or at least that's what I think. Because like you said, if we're not in those spaces, we don't really know.
So just to be clear, the data work you're talking about in policy is like leverage the data and like when you say policy, you mean in politics to go in and figure out how to drive change, yeah?
Yes, I just don't like politics. That's the hard part. I guess policy changes, yes. I use data sets, use public data, have made recommendations when I was in college, have done projects around it, but now it's haven't been able to tap into that again.
I mean, the way I would approach it is a couple of ways. I mean, so to your point, how much networking can you do before it start yielding fruit, right? I mean, I don't know that there's a hard answer for that. I would just I would just say if you don't like the fish you're catching, change the bait, right? Where are you networking? Who are you networking with? Um, Immediately, I'll give you an example. On this call, we have somebody who's very well connected to somebody who's running for District 3 right now that could probably use some help in understanding the District 3 numbers, right, Jessica? And so volunteering for a project to go in and help out the District 3 candidate may be your foot in the door if that person gets elected to have you do more of that, right? Not sure if you know, but Jessica's connected to one of the current candidates for District 3. But that's what I would say, right? I think that I think One of the things I always tell people is like, look, the hardest thing is to find the first job. Once you get the first job, it'll just take off after that. If there's anything I can do, connect with me on LinkedIn. We can talk about it over Zoom or coffee and connect you with folks. Immediately when I start thinking about folks that do analytics, I start looking at some of these consulting firms like KPMG, et cetera. Like all those guys are here. They're always looking for people. And that's what they do. I mean, I call them bean counters because that, they're auditors. They come in and they do a lot of that work. And so, and I also have a great network with a very senior Latina who works at KPMG. So I'd love to introduce you and get you connected there, right? So don't get discouraged. I would say I would go back and look at how you're networking, where you're networking, and maybe pivot. One of the other amazing networks that I also believe, who Jessica represents, is the Latina Coalition of Silicon Valley. Going to their annual brunch will put you in the room with a bunch of people that might benefit from your skills.
Carlos, I like this because we don't talk about this a lot in our community either, right? It's something that other communities with continuing college generation families, higher income families might talk about, but everything's been so linear for us in terms of go to school, get a high paying job, get paid more. But this idea of working like side projects just for your own curiosity, just to keep your resume relevant. How about you as an employer? How do you look at those and value those? Like, let's say Cynthia applied to work with you next year, and she had this side project of doing some volunteer work. How do you view that as an employer for hard skill? Does it count?
Oh, absolutely, right? I mean, I always want to, for me personally, I'm always looking for somebody that's just not coming in to do an 8 to 5. I want somebody that's got passion, that's going to bring a new perspective and make me think about things differently, right? And so, I also make it a point to get to know the folks on my team at a personal level because you never know how those perspectives are going to come in and help you with whatever project. And so, there's been many times where, you know, like I'll give you an example, perfect example. There's a gentleman on my team who's got a background in finance and he was joined my team and he was a customer success manager. I got to know him and it turns out that when he was in college, he was part of this group called SIFE. I don't know if you guys are familiar with SIFE, which is Students in Free Enterprise. It's now called Enactus. And one of the things that they do is they have like a public speaking competition. And apparently this guy is two-time World Cup champion of this public speaking competition. He's on the box of Wheaties or whatever and he beat out, like Stanford or whatever. And so this guy's got a way of being able to story tell, and he's got this like radio disc jockey voice. Well, he now does all the voiceovers for our digital engagement marketing stuff that we do for the company. A lot of these, like, you get these videos now. It's like, hey, welcome to HPE. My name is Steve. I'm going to help you through the onboarding process. He now creates those videos and voices them over because that's something that he was doing before. Had I not known that, I probably would have paid some third-party agency to go and do this. And now he runs a team of like 9 people in Costa Rica to just do this, right? So this is one of those things about kind of bring your whole self to work and don't underestimate the power of all those side hustles.
So good. Great question. Jose?
I was gonna say, because a lot of networking is just, sending cold messages or like cold emails to like recruiters or mentors or all
No,
these.
that's not networking.
Oh, really? You think so?
No,
You think
that's
so?
just cold calling. Are you trying to sell me something? No, man. So I'll give you an example. We were just talking about this the other day. Sylvia and I happen to be in this like 10 feet apart, didn't get a chance to meet each other, right? What I would say is, look, the difference between us and some of the more affluent communities is that they can lean on their Stanford and Harvard alum networks, right? We unfortunately don't have that. But what we do have is we have SHIP, the Society of Hispanic Professionals and Engineers, right? We have Prospanica, right? We have LBSA. We have all of these other groups that on LinkedIn or on Instagram, every other month, they're putting on events and they're asking, hey, let's get together, let's whatever, right? And guess what? When you show up, like the event that we were at, Sylvia, there's probably a good 200 people there, right? I got to meet a data scientist from TikTok. I got to meet 3 people from Meta, right? I actually brought a nephew of mine who lives in Modesto who just graduated a cybersecurity degree, and I was like, I need you to come to this event and practice your network. He'd never done it before. And he was so impressed by how cool everybody was and how forthcoming they were with like, hey, well, you should go check this out. Had me on LinkedIn, right? That's networking. Because if you just send me a message on LinkedIn, I don't know about you guys, but LinkedIn has changed and it's now become like a network of people trying to sell me stuff. Like I get all these messages on my inbox now that makes it so I don't even check my LinkedIn anymore because they're not even real people. They're all trying to sell me something or schedule a call and tell me about how their AI is better than everybody else's, right? So now you're competing for that attention. But if you go to Ship, guess what? 99% of people there are Latino, and most of them were where you're at now. And again, I feel like we all have that sense of obligation of giving back, right? That's why we go to these events. You've already filtered out those people who are like, I made it, I don't need to go, I don't need help, right? They're not going to show up to those events. Most of the folks that show up there is because they're legitimately looking to connect and see what they can do to help.
Here's the
Thank you.
thing, that's a great question because part of it is showing up, right? But also one thing that I hear a lot is we go when we think we need something sometimes, right? We start networking. We think, well, I'm going to start looking for a job, so maybe I'll go. But you should always be going anyway. Go when you can. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know if you hit it off and maybe they think about you for a role that's opening up in a year. You're not even looking now, but guess what? You're going to be the first person they think of when that opens up. So show up, join groups that mean something to you. On LinkedIn, hey, who's going where in next month? I want to try to, go to 2 networking events. Which ones are out there? Who's
Yeah.
setting something up? Like just keep reaching out to people. But showing
Show
up.
up, but make an impression. Right? You want people to remember you. Like, I don't know if you picked up on it, Sylvia, but my group were the only ones that had the Unidos t-shirts on, right? And people came up and were like, I'm seeing these Unidos there. Like, what are you guys? Like, what are you guys doing, right? So it's like relevant. Like, and you and I didn't meet, but you remember seeing the name. So it's like, oh yeah, right? So you got to show up and how do you stand out, right? And it's like they say, it's not what you say, it's how you make people feel, right? And this is where the law of attraction comes in because if you come in and you're like, dude, I'm so passionate. I'm working my ass off. I just can't seem to. I just see that little. People are gonna want to help you, but if you just walk in and you just hang out in the corner, and your body language is like, dude, I don't want to be here. People aren't gonna really engage.
I love what you said earlier too, Carlos, just about about the magic, right? Letting some of it unfold. Like I've seen a lot of people go into networking events with such a prescriptive, so much expectations put on like how it should go, right? But networking can also be while you're waiting in line, seeing a cool shirt, and they'll say, "What does that mean? Like, what are the t-shirts from?" Could be in the coffee line, right? Like, "Oh, what's your order? It's my first time here." And so I think like moving away from what we think the prescription of LinkedIn networking is to finding those safe spaces and to showing up with a brand and ready to be open and curious and just an invitation to see what happens. That's really helpful. Thank you. Other questions? Thanks, Jose. Thanks for the question. We have a couple more for you before we start our rapid fire
Sure.
questions. Sylvia?
What do you wish someone had showed you back when you first started? Now there's so much insight. Now you're giving a lot of advice. Now you've got a great group of early career professionals here. But what's that thing that really stands out as, gosh, I want people to know this?
That it's okay to fail.
Mm,
Um, you know, this whole fail fast and learn faster is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
What's crazy is I look back and I try to identify things that I have failed at. And it's just gonna sound weird, but I can't think of any because even though in the moment it felt like I had failed, longer term it was supposed to happen that way and it resulted in something so much better. And so I can't think of something where I was like, I felt so bad that I got fired or I had to start over. And it was just like this moment of like, I can't do that again, right? My entire career has been a series of, like I said, coincidental circumstances or blessings or however you want to call it. But I now live and die by the ask for forgiveness, not permission. Right? That I feel I helped me throughout my startup career, all my startups. And I feel it's that mindset that drives the innovation and it drives that kind of growth. And now that I'm at this company, which has a reputation of being a reliable company, people are risk adverse. And we were sharing this before. When I first joined this company, I didn't think I'd be here for more than a year because I was not aligned with that culture. Like, I'm not just going to sit here and wait. Like, we should be doing a bunch more. Like, why aren't we doing, right? And, you know, last year, they actually assigned CEO Antonio Neri as my coach and mentor, right? The CEO of HPE. And in our introductory call, I told Antonio, I need you to know two things about me. Is I ask for forgiveness, not permission, and I build Trojan horses, which is I'm going to go build. I'm not going to tell anybody until it's ready. And then you can't stop me because I already did it. Now I just need to fund it to scale it. And he chuckled and leaned back and he said, I wish we had more people like you in this company. And my response to him is, I'm like, you have no idea what you just did. Right? And so I would say is like, look, we're all going to make mistakes. As long as you're doing stuff with the right intentions, I always tell people, look, if I frustrate you or I upset you or I say something that maybe came out wrong, give me the benefit of the doubt and always assume good intent. I may not realize how something I did made you feel. Let me know and I'll course correct. But my intention was never to be disrespectful or step on toes. It's like we just got to move, right? So as long as you do stuff, I feel with good intentions, and you're directionally making a decision and where you think the company needs to go, I don't think you can ever lose.
That's great advice. I love that. So there's a failure on the job. What advice do you give someone who's navigating all this uncertainty and layoffs and fear of, gosh, am I going to find the next thing or am I going to lose my job? What can you share there?
I don't know anybody who's been laid off who died not finding a job, right? Everything is temporary, right? What I would say is I've been laid off twice in my career. And I always tell people I've only interviewed for the first job, which was that little startup. Every job I've had since has been through a connection. Either somebody goes to a new company and they pull me over or whatever that may be. But I don't think I've ever had to cold interview for a job since. And so what I would say is when you do have your job, just know that it's your interview for your next gig. Every day is the interview for the next gig. You are your own personal brand. And if people legitimately enjoy working for you, your career is going to work on its own. Like you're going to get pulled. You're going to, you got to make that impact. People are going to have to enjoy working with you. It'll take care of itself, right? And so the times that I have been laid off gave me an opportunity to kind of step back and say, okay, maybe it was time to go. And had they not let me go, I'd probably be there for another 10 years. Like that probably, like I had already outgrown that company. Let me think about what is I want to do differently. The other thing I would say is that if you are nervous about kind of where you're at, then maybe you're not at the right company. Maybe you're working on stuff that is not as meaningful as you'd like it to be. And so one of the things I always tell people is it's easier to find a job when you already have a job. So again, it goes back to, I don't recommend people to have the same role for more than 2 years because then you fall into that rut. Doesn't mean you have to leave the company, but get like an expanded role or an expanded scope or do something a little different within the company because that continues to elevate your brand within the company. And I could tell you for most parts, companies have multiple rounds of layoffs. It's not until the second or third round that they start cutting into the meat, into the bone, right? Usually the first couple of rounds of layoffs is usually we're getting rid of kind of cutting the fat, people that aren't necessarily pulling their weight, just kind of cost savings. People aren't going to let go of their all-stars in the first round, right? And so that's what I would say is make sure that you're in a role where you feel like you're crushing it, you enjoy it, you're making the difference. But if you find yourself in a role where you're like, yeah, this isn't really doing much for the company, then you should probably already start thinking about either are there skill sets I need to adapt? Do I need to raise my hand more to go take on this other project, or kind of we kind of call them kind of stretch projects, or is it time to start kind of dusting off my resume and start communicating to people that maybe it's time, right? I wouldn't wait to get laid. Like getting laid off should never be a surprise. I mean, either you should be able to see the writing on the walls. If all of a sudden your boss is like, "Hey, I'm going to be late paying you this week," that should be a red flag, right? Or if all of a sudden you're seeing that free lunch that you used to get every Friday goes away, and now they're replacing with vending machines, red flag, right? Like maybe it's time to start polishing off that resume.
great one. Well,
You
before,
know, that's the, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sylvia.
go ahead.
I was just thinking when you were talking, Carlos, that nobody tells us that in our early career, that we think about it as companies, right? You move from a company to a company, you want to work for this company, but it's really people that you're working for. And your early career, you might, right? You might be sending your resumes, but when you get to senior level positions, when there's a new CMO, you know, a new chief marketing officer, a new chief data officer, they bring in their A team from the last 12 companies that they've worked for. They say, I want to recruit this person. I want to recruit, and that's part of their negotiation, saying, I want to bring in my team. And so I think what's relevant for our community to understand is you might not be in your dream job, but if you're working with one or two people that you really like, you know, don't sulk, right? Don't think that this is it. Don't think that this is the only opportunity. That person who's an all-star that you see, that you connect to, they're going to move to a bigger job. You see it. Everyone feels their vibe. Those are the people that you want to keep working for. You don't want to let them down just because you don't love the company that you work for.
Yeah, I would say an example of that is, so when I was working at that company doing the text messaging stuff, one of the managers that was part of that group had left and went to go work at another company. And within 3 weeks, he calls me and he goes, "Hey, Carlos," he goes, "we have this gig over here, um, and we need somebody to go in and help us support all of Latin America and the Caribbean."
Ooh,
And I was like, "Doing what?" And he goes, "Well, we sell point-to-point microwave radios, and we need a pre-sales engineer to help us like sell this into." I was like, I know nothing about radio systems. Like, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "No, no, but you speak Spanish. We can teach you the radio stuff because we know you're technically inclined, but we'll teach you the radio stuff. We just need you to support the sales team and be able to answer technical questions about our products in Spanish." And I was like, all right, well, I speak Spanish, so I can go. So I ended up moving again, negotiated salary, took like a week off in between two gigs, and I went to go work. And then I spent the next 3 years, 85% of the time traveling all over Latin America and the Caribbean selling point-to-point microwave radios. And through that became an RF engineer. So I went from knowing everything about cellular networks and now knowing everything about point-to-point microwave and wireless communication. And the beautiful part in my career is that, you know, today, if you think about Wi-Fi, it's networking plus a wireless radio put together. So then when Wi-Fi became a thing, I immediately became like one of the few industry experts in the space because I knew both wireless RF and networking, right? I became in high demand. And again, I didn't plan it that way. And to your point, I got pulled over because this guy that used to be my boss knew me and he trusted me, knew what I was capable of, and he pulled me. And it's been like that, I would say, almost every role I've had since.
That's great. That's great because you can teach great talent new things to do, right? But you can't teach somebody who's coachable, who's open, who's charismatic, and who has proven leadership experience and ambition. So it's really important to know that that's what great leaders look for ultimately, and not to overthink or over worry some of the gaps you might have. We have just a couple more minutes. We're going to start our speed round of questions. No pressure, just the first response that comes off of your head.
Sure.
Any questions before we start? Okay, this is just a way for us to get to know Carlos a little bit better. Carlos, living or dead, who is a hero of yours?
Oh, you should have sent these to me ahead of time. Um, I mean, I would say my grandfather.
Mhm.
He kind of set the stage for all of this with coming to the US originally and getting my dad over here and all that stuff and a lot of stuff that he had dealt with. He actually was an entrepreneur himself. He ended up owning one of the largest hog farms in the state of Jalisco, just out of nothing. Um, and then all that crippled and went away because of politics stuff. But yeah, I would say, it's not lost on me on whose shoulders I stand on.
Favorite project that you've worked on course of your career? Anything, tech related, non-tech related, whatever, just your favorite project.
Well, I would say those two, right? I feel very privileged to be able to say that I contributed to bringing text messaging to Mexico because everybody, their grandmother literally uses it now. But I would say one of the most rewarding things is when I was doing that point-to-point microwave stuff. What I didn't know at the time, which I eventually figured out, is the reason that we were selling these microwave radios is that we were now bringing telephone and internet to very rural areas all over Latin America that before then had no connectivity. Some of you guys are too young to remember this, but certain parts of Mexico, like each town maybe had like 20 or 30 phones, and only the rich people had them, and then nobody else had phones. And so by bringing in the point-to-point microwave systems, we were now bringing, phone lines and internet to schools and stuff like that. So being able to contribute to that was always something that I thought was super cool.
What's a song that reminds you of your youth? Every time you hear it, brings back a good memory of your youth.
Oh man, my mom always used to cling to Bronco. So any Bronco song.
I love it. I think we can all picture that. We're going to honor your time. We have 30 seconds left. Everyone on the call who hasn't joined our Cura.us newsletter, please sign up. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram. We're Cura_early career. We want to bring you more speakers like Carlos. We want to have more of these discussions. We want to hear from you. What do you want to know? Because Sylvia and I are out there hustling to get you the information that you need. So get in touch with us, get in touch with each other. Don't be shy, okay? This is all really valuable. Thank you so much for your time, Carlos. We hope to see you soon.
Cool. Great to meet everybody.
Great
See ya.
Thank
discussion.
you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.